Hello everybody and welcome back to another Pokémon Emerald video. Today, for a change, I will be using a Pokémon from the third generation. So we will see how Whiscash does in its home generation. For the rules, I can only use my starter in combat, I cannot use items from my bag in battle, I can't raise my evasion in any way, and I can't use cheats or glitches. Whiscash is not that bad of a Pokémon and has a very interesting typing with few weaknesses. For some reason, Game Freak loved this type combination at the start. Quagsire, Whiscash and Swampert all share this typing. Unfortunately, most of those Pokémons are defensive, which are not that great in solo runs. Whiscash, for example, has somewhat mediocre stats other than HP, and the speed is quite low too, to be honest. For the start of the game, these stats should be enough, but unfortunately, my only offensive move is Mud Slap, which is not very good, especially if resisted by Trico. For the fight against a rival, I used a bunch of tickles to lower his defense and then one-shotted him with the Mud Slap. By the time I got to the grunt in the forest, I was able to level up a bit more and finally learn a good move in Water Gun. My nature rolled poorly and it lowers my special attack, which might be a problem, especially later, since I want to use stuff like Surf and Ice Beam. At least for the start of the game, that should not matter too much. I now have a super effective move for Roxanne, so the fight against her should be quite easy. Both of her Geodudes are a one-shot, and while Nosepass offers a bit more tankiness, mostly because of the berry and potions, eventually it is defeated too, and she is not able to do that much damage to me, since I resist rock attacks. Anyway, once we have defeated her and obtained the first badge, it's time to go solve a couple of side quests, starting off with the Pico rescue, and the Team Aqua Grant this time around was one-shotted immediately. Now that we have saved this Wingull, we can do the stuff at the Sylph, and then before leaving, we can take on our rival. This time around, May is actually quite dangerous. Her Trico now knows Absorb, which is 4 times super effective on me, and so it does a lot of damage, and also recovers her a good amount of HP. Fortunately, I can defeat it with Rock Tomb before I fall myself, and so that is done too. Next, I decided to attempt Brawly. I am somewhat strong at this point in the game, especially because I just learned Magnitude. That move relies heavily on RNG since the power can vary a lot, but as long as I get decent rolls, I should be able to get through him. The fight gets quite close against Makuhita as I roll poorly a few times in a row and I survive on a handful of HP. Fortunately, I can get a couple of great rolls at the end, and thanks to that, I can defeat his ace Pokémon. Now that we have obtained this badge too, we can move on to the next town, and in Slateport we have to deliver some parts, but there are a couple of Team Aqua Grants who want to steal them. Their Pokémons are not that tanky, and between Magnitude and Rock Tomb, I should be able to one-shot all of them. Along the way, I got confused, which is quite annoying to be honest, but it did not last very long, and so it did not have a great impact on the fight. During this match I was somewhat distracted, and so I ended up using a bunch of water guns instead of the better moves, but I got through them anyway. Honestly, I was a bit worried about our next fight. May has now evolved her starter, and Grovyle has quite a bit better stats than Trico. The only positive is that it still only knows Absorb, which is not that great of a move. Also, I took the time against Wingull to set up a few amnesias, and once I did that, I also leveled up, and so I can substitute it for rest. To this day, I am not sure if that was a good idea or not, but what is done is done. Thanks to my extra special defense, I can get through Grovyle, and the last Pokémon is no match for me. Once we have reached Moville and leveled a bit around town, we can take on the gym leader there. Wattson is not that problematic. I have Magnitude, which is super effective, and Stab, so all of his Pokémon should be a one-shot. Also, since I am part ground, I do not have to worry about any electric attack, and so this gym is most likely the freest one in the entire game for Whiscash. I had a Cherry Berry equipped since Thunder Wave still works for some reason, even though it is an electric move. Anyway, once we reach the Mitterfall Caves, we are informed about Max's plan, and so we have to go up the volcano to try to stop him. The fight against him was not particularly fun. At this point in the game, I am mostly relying on my physical attacks, and Mightyena's Intimidate is going to be a bit of a problem. Not to mention that since that Pokémon survived a turn, it had the opportunity to use Sand Attack on me to lower my accuracy. At least his Pokémon are not particularly powerful against me, and so I can endure the fight against him. Once we got down from the mountain, we can take on the next gym leader. Flannery uses fire types, and so this fight should be very easy for Whiscash too. Since I have Earthquake now, I can just spam that move over and over again. I was unsure whether it would be a one-shot on Torkoal, but that ended up being the case. Now that we have the first 4 badges, we can go back and face our dad for the normal badge. The fight against him could be a bit dangerous. Earthquake has a lot of power, but I was unsure whether or not it would be enough to one-shot his base Pokémons. Fortunately for me, that was indeed the case, and so I do not have to worry about his base Pokémon. The only thing I had to be careful about was slacking and counter, and by using Water Gun when he can move, I finished off that Pokémon too in a few turns. By completing this gym, we are given the Surf HM, which is extremely useful, and I immediately taught it to Whiscash. That is a major improvement in my damage potential. And also we can use it out of combat to explore more of the region. Once we got to the Weather Institute, we used that HM to sweep away Shelly's team. Moving on from that secondary encounter, we can take on the rifle for the penultimate time in the video. Here I almost lost because Grovyle does a massive amount of damage with Leaf Blade, but since she did not get the crit, I can still survive. Lombre almost finishes me off with an Absorb, but I can endure that too. Next up we have the gym fight against Winona, and for the fight against her I really should have thought the Ice Beam move. It would have been quite useful, but instead I kept it in my bag for some reason. The fight against her was actually quite dangerous, mostly because Tropius has grass attacks, and so if he is able to set up the sun and then solar beam me, that could have been a major issue. Fortunately, I can defeat it before it can pull off that combo, and from here the fight should be easier. Between Surf and Secret Power, I can two-shot most of her Pokémons. The only thing that is very tanky is Altaria. For her, Surf is a bad option since it is resisted and has a lot of special defense. Instead, I have to whittle her down with the Secret Power. Once that Pokémon is defeated too, we can go back to our journey, and in the next town we have to take on May. This time she is able to defeat me thanks to Leaf Blade from Grovyle. She is actually quite dangerous because she has a lot of grass Pokémons, which are Whiscash main weakness. Luckily for me, she got rid of the Lombre, because if she evolved it into a Ludicolo, that might have been a problem, since I am left with very low HP. Instead, I have to spend a few turns taking down her last Pelipper. Moving on, we can get to the Pokémon Tower, and here we are given the Magma Emblem. With this key item, we can enter the Groudon's cave, and here, after clearing a bunch of Team Magma grunts, we have to take on their leader. Once again, the fight against him is a bit problematic. I am still relying mostly on my physical attacks, namely Earthquake, and so the damage is less than stellar. Halfway through the fight, I decided to switch to Surf, which was a good idea as it is able to two-shot all of his Pokémons. Even though we won this fight, it is a bit late as the legendary Pokémon got awakened anyway and ran away. Instead, we get to the Team Aqua base, but here we are only able to find one of their admirals, and the fight against him goes much better than I expected. Next, I did a bit of training because our next major battle is going to be against Tate and Liza. And oh boy, these guys turned out to be way more difficult than I anticipated. In this fight, having amnesia might have been actually very good, because their special attacks deal quite a lot of damage to me. Even though Surf is super effective, it does not have quite enough damage to get through their Pokémons, and I only won in this attempt because I got a crit against Xatu. To make things worse, Solrock can use Sunny Day to lower my damage, and Lunatone can use Light Screen to lower my damage even further. After a few attempts, I was able to defeat them, and so I obtained the penultimate badge in the game. We are not done with this island though, because we noticed some Team Magma members going to the Pokémon NASA building. Here we meet up with Steven Stone, and we have to take on the leadership of Team Magma. This fight is a bit annoying because they have a lot of Intimidate and Confusion Pokémons, but fortunately I can just spam Surf over and over again. While it is not super effective on everything they have, it is still a good move. It is neutral on most of their Pokémons, and it destroys the two Camerapts. The fight still took quite a while because I lost a few turns to Confusion, and since the damage from Surf is split once you hit two targets and my special attack is not that great, I still had to use 2 or 3 Surfs per Pokémon to defeat them. At least it was a somewhat safe fight. Now that we are done with them, Steven gives us the Dive HM, and we can use that move to get to the seafloor cave. Here we are met by Archie, who wants to fight us for the right to awaken Kyogre. His team is very similar to Max's Pokémon's, and so the fight against him was not that interesting. I spammed Surf quite a bit, and even though he has a Sharpedo, that Pokémon is very frail, and so it is defeated in a couple of attacks. As we all know, unfortunately beating him here does not stop the story of the game from progressing, and so the legendary Pokémon is awoken anyway. Now that both of them are alive, their abilities are clashing with each other and switching the weather from sunny to rainy back and forth very fast. To stop this disaster, we enlist Rayquaza, and the third legendary quickly puts an end to the fighting. Now that that situation is dealt with too, we can resume the badge collection, and it just so happens that the last gym is nearby. Juan uses water types mostly, which is fine. Fortunately, none of them are immune to Earthquake, and so I can use that move over and over again. It does not have any Intimidate uses either, and so this fight should be quite easy. The only thing that turned out to be a bit of a problem is Kindra, but that was mostly because of the potions, not the dodging this time around. And now that we have completed all of the gyms, we are ready to enter the Victory Road. Here we are immediately stopped by Wally, who wants to fight us. His team is a bit scary. I still cannot do much to Altaria because I did not teach Ice Beam yet, and Roselia is also a bit of a problem if I do not outspeed. Fortunately, neither of those two things actually turned out to be an issue, and so I can just sweep mostly through his team. Fortunately, neither of those two things were a major issue, and so I can mostly sweep through his team. After taking care of the rest of his Pokémons, I can make my way through the cave and get to the league. Here I was unsure what to use in my moveset, and in the end I decided to go for Earthquake, Return, Sub and Rest. Honestly, Rest was a bit of a mistake. I do not have enough defenses to reliably rest my HP, and what often happens is that once I wake up from the rest, I am barely any HP higher than when I started. Anyway, for Sidney, I use Substitute at the start as usual to dodge most of his annoying moves. Of course, I still have to deal with the annoying Intimidate, which is not that great because it lowers my Earthquake damage. Because of that, I am unable to one-shot Crodant and Absol, but fortunately for me, instead of attacking, they prefer to set up. Now that Sidney is defeated, we can move on to Phoebe. Phoebe uses a lot of ghost types, which should not be that big of a deal this time around. I have Earthquake and Ice Beam to deal with them. Once again, I use Substitute at the start of the fight, mostly because I do not want to get hit by the curse from her first Dusclops, but it can also be useful for a couple of annoying moves later into the fight. Since there is no Intimidate in this fight, my damage output is actually decent, and it allows me to one-shot most of her Pokémons. The only things that survive a hit are her two Dusclops, because those Pokémons have a lot of defenses. But eventually they crumble too, and so we are done with Phoebe too. Glacia is the third member of the Elite Four, and she proved to be quite a bit of a challenge. Not enough to defeat me, but things were quite close. Once again, I use substitute at the start, this time around because I did not want to get frozen or paralyzed by their attacks. Unfortunately, that gives her the time to set up the hail, which goes through the sub, and so it chips me down each turn. Her Pokémons are also quite tanky, and so often I cannot one-shot them with a single attack, and that gives her the time to set up hail once again once it runs out. This is one of the few fights where rest was actually useful. Thanks to that, I can recover my HP, and even though I take quite a lot of hits from Blizzard, I can still endure them long enough to sort of PP stall Celio. I have to rest again because my HP got dangerously low. This time it's different because Celio runs out of Blizzard PPs, so she has to use Double Edge. That move deals less damage, and so I can take it a bit more. Still, between all of the hits I took, I have to rest for a third time against this Celio. This is the last one because it defeats itself with the recoil from Double Edge. Honestly, that was not great because then Glacia comes out and first of all sets up the hail again, but most importantly can deal good damage with Ice Beam. Fortunately, I can take it out quite quickly, and even though Wall Rain breaks my sub and gets my HP low, I can finish it off with one last Earthquake. That fight was quite long and kinda close at multiple points, but we are through. Last for the Elite Four is a Drake, and this fight should be a bit easier. I once again used a substitute at the start to protect myself from anything weird, and from there I can start the Ice Beam spam. Most of his team is very weak to that move. In fact, the only thing that somewhat resists it is Kindra, but I can take care of that Pokémon by switching to Earthquake for once. All the remaining dragons are 4 times weak to Ice Beam, and so they are easy one-shots. Now that we have defeated the Elite Four, it's time to challenge the champion of the Hoenn region. The fight against Wallace proved to be a bit of a mess. I ended up losing quite a few times, but eventually I got a good attempt. This time, substitute was not the first thing I did. Instead, I lowered his HP with Earthquake so that Water Spout would not hurt as much. From here, I mostly had to rely on Earthquake and Return doing enough damage to two-shot their Pokémons. Ludicolo was nice enough to not spam Giga Drain on me, and that single turn of peace gave me enough breathing room to defeat the dancing Pokémon. Tentacruel is an easy one-shot with Earthquake before it can do anything weird with Toxic, and in the mirror match I had enough time to properly prepare myself for the rest of the fight. First, I rested to get my HP back, and I was lucky enough to not get hit that many times while I was sleeping. Then I tried to set up a fresh sub, but it got broke immediately by a crit, and so I had to use another one. Here I could have rested and recovered even more of my HP, but I'm not sure how much that would have helped. Instead, I went straight for the offensive, and fortunately things sort of worked out in my favor. I got enough turns to defeat Gyarados, even though it broke the sub, and for my Lotic I did not waste any time and used 2 Earthquakes, barely surviving his Surf, but finally defeating the champion of the Hoenn region. Whiscash was not that bad to use. His typing is very good, but unfortunately he does not have the stats to sweep through most of the teams in the region. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, ring the bell, and all of that YouTube stuff. If you have any comments with ideas or feedback, leave them down below. And I'll see you next week. Bye!